My name is Karam. I'm 34 years old, and on December 25th, 2018, I committed an unthinkable act of terror. I set fire to a church packed with Christian families celebrating Christmas. But Jesus changed everything that day. I was born into the Saudi royal family, surrounded by wealth that most people could never imagine. Golden palaces, servants who catered to my every whim, and power that extended far beyond the borders of our kingdom. From the moment I could walk, I was told that I was special, chosen, above ordinary people. My father would remind me daily that our bloodline was sacred, that we were guardians of the holy sites of Islam, and that this gave us authority over life and death. My childhood was spent in marble halls where my footsteps echoed with importance. I had tutors from around the world, but the most important lessons came from our religious instructors. They taught me that Islam was the only true faith and that anyone who worshipped differently was not just wrong, but dangerous. Christians, they said, were particularly offensive to Allah because they claimed Jesus was the Son of God. This was blasphemy of the highest order. Every day after my secular studies, I would sit with the Imam who served our family. He would open the Quran and explain how Christians had corrupted the message of Jesus, turning him into an idol. He told me stories of the Crusades, painting all Christians as bloodthirsty invaders who wanted to destroy Islam. In his lessons, there was no room for nuance or understanding. Christians were enemies, and enemies deserved whatever judgment came their way. As I grew older, this hatred became more than just doctrine. It became personal. I remember the first time I saw Christians worshiping in a small church during a visit to Lebanon. The sight of them kneeling before a cross filled me with rage that surprised even me. How dare they worship a man as if he were God? How dare they sing and celebrate while believing such lies? My bodyguard had to restrain me from storming into their service. My teenage years were marked by increasingly violent thoughts toward Christians. I would fantasize about ways to make them pay for their blasphemy. When I heard about terrorist attacks on churches, I felt satisfaction rather than horror. In my twisted mind, those attackers were heroes defending the true faith. I began to study these attacks, not out of curiosity, but out of admiration. I wanted to understand their methods, their planning, their courage to act where others only talked. The servants in our palace learned quickly never to mention Christmas around me. The very word would send me into a fury that could last for days. Christmas represented everything I despised about Christianity. They celebrated the birth of someone they claimed was divine, throwing parties and exchanging gifts as if this lie deserved recognition. The commercialization of it made me even angrier. To me, it proved that Christians were not just blasphemous, but greedy and materialistic as well. My father encouraged this hatred, though he was more subtle about it. He would speak of Christians as a threat to our way of life, people who wanted to impose their values on the Muslim world. He told me that one day I might need to take action to protect our faith and our family's honor. These conversations filled me with purpose. I believed I was being prepared for a holy mission. By the time I reached my 20s, my hatred had crystallized into something cold and calculating. I no longer flew into rages when I heard about Christianity. Instead, I felt a steady, burning contempt that never left me. I began to see every Christian I encountered as a potential target. When I traveled abroad for business or pleasure, I would study the churches I passed, noting their security, their schedules, their vulnerabilities. I convinced myself that my violent thoughts were righteous. After all, wasn't I defending Allah from those who mocked him? Wasn't I protecting Islam from those who sought to corrupt it? The more I justified my hatred, the easier it became to imagine acting on it. I told myself that God would reward me for having the courage to do what others were too weak to do. The wealth of my family gave me access to anything I wanted, including weapons and explosives. I began to collect these items, telling myself I was simply being prepared. I studied bomb-making techniques online, learning from terrorist manuals that I found on encrypted websites. I told myself this was research, but deep down, I knew I was planning something terrible. Have you ever felt hatred so pure and consuming that it became the center of your identity? That is what I had become. I was no longer just a Saudi prince who happened to hate Christians. I was hatred itself, walking around in expensive clothes and living in luxury while planning murder. My heart had become so dark that I could not see the evil growing inside me. The irony is that I thought I was serving God when I was actually serving Satan. I believed my hatred made me righteous when it was making me demonic. I convinced myself that violence against Christians would bring me closer to Allah when it was actually dragging me toward hell. Every day I grew more evil while believing I was becoming more holy. This is the man I was on December 24th, 2018. A prince with unlimited resources, a heart full of hatred, and a plan to strike a blow for Islam by attacking Christians on their most sacred day. I had no conscience left, no empathy, no recognition of the humanity of my intended victims. I saw only targets and blasphemers who deserved whatever fate I chose to give them. The planning began in earnest during the summer of 2018. I had decided that Christmas would be the perfect time to strike. What better way to wound Christianity than to attack them on the day they celebrated the birth of their false Messiah? The symbolism was perfect. While they gathered to worship their lie, I would show them the power of the true faith. I spent weeks driving through different neighborhoods, studying churches and their routines. I would park across the street during their Sunday services, watching people come and go, timing their movements, noting how many attended. I learned which churches had security cameras and which ones were more vulnerable. I was methodical about this research, treating it like a business project that required careful analysis. The church I eventually selected was a modest building in a mixed neighborhood. It was not the largest congregation I had observed, but it had several qualities that made it perfect for my purposes. The building was older, with wooden construction that would burn easily. More importantly, it had limited exit points. The main entrance was in the front, and there was only one side door that I could see. If I could block both exits, the people inside would be trapped. I began visiting the area regularly, always at different times, and using different vehicles from my collection. I learned their schedule by heart. Sunday morning services at 10, Wednesday evening Bible study at 7, and special services during holidays. Christmas Day service was scheduled for 9 in the morning, which meant families would arrive early to get good seats. Children would be there, dressed in their finest clothes, excited about the holiday. The thought of their fear when the fire started filled me with anticipation rather than horror. The technical aspects of the attack required careful planning. I researched accelerants and fire patterns online, studying how arsonists had successfully burned buildings in the past. I learned that gasoline would spread quickly but burn too fast, while diesel fuel would provide a more sustained burn. I decided on a mixture that would give me time to escape while ensuring the fire would spread rapidly throughout the building. I purchased the fuel gradually, using different gas stations and paying with cash to avoid leaving a trail. I bought several containers, storing them in a warehouse that my family owned on the outskirts of the city. I also acquired timer devices that would allow me to delay the ignition, giving me a head start before the flames began. Every purchase was calculated to avoid suspicion. My plan was to arrive early on Christmas morning before the congregation gathered. I would douse the exits with fuel and set up the ignition devices. The timers would give me 30 minutes to get away before the fire started. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the exits would already be blocked by flames, and I would be miles away with an alibi. During these months of preparation, I felt a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. I was finally going to take action instead of just harboring hatred. I was going to strike a real blow against Christianity instead of just fantasizing about it. Every night, I would lie in bed, imagining the moment when the fire would start, picturing the panic and terror of the Christians trapped inside. These thoughts brought me a satisfaction that frightened even me. I tested my plan multiple times, driving the route from my palace to the church and timing how long it would take. I identified 3 different escape routes in case one was blocked. I prepared fake identification and a cover story about visiting business associates in case anyone questioned my presence in the area. Every detail was rehearsed until it became automatic. The weeks leading up to Christmas, I watched news reports about holiday preparations in Christian communities. I saw families shopping for gifts, decorating their homes, planning special meals. Instead of recognizing their joy and humanity, I felt only disgust. How could they celebrate when their entire faith was built on lies? How could they be happy while living in rebellion against Allah? Their very existence seemed like an insult to everything I believed. I told myself that I was not planning to hurt innocent people. In my twisted logic, there were no innocent Christians. They had all chosen to follow a false religion, so they all deserved whatever consequences came from that choice. The children would be better off dying young than growing up to spread more blasphemy. The adults had made their choice and would face the judgment they deserved. Can you imagine harboring such evil in your heart? Can you understand how hatred can corrupt every thought until murder seems not only justified, but righteous? This is what I had become. I was so consumed by religious fanaticism that I could not see the humanity of people who believed differently than I did. The final week before Christmas, I made my last preparations. I loaded the fuel containers into a van that could not be traced to me. I prepared my escape kit with cash, fake documents, and a change of clothes. I wrote what I thought would be my martyrdom letter, explaining my actions as a defense of Islam against Christian blasphemy. I was proud of that letter, believing it would inspire other Muslims to similar acts of courage. On Christmas Eve, I could barely sleep. Tomorrow would be the day I had planned for months. Tomorrow, I would show the world that Muslims would not tolerate the worship of false gods in our lands. Tomorrow, I would become a hero of the faith by punishing those who dared to celebrate the birth of their fake Messiah. I spent that final night praying to Allah, asking for strength to carry out my mission. I believed with absolute certainty that what I was planning was righteous, that God would reward me for having the courage to act. I felt chosen, special, called to do something that others were too weak to attempt. I was ready to become a murderer, and I believed it would make me holy. Christmas morning arrived crisp and clear. I woke before dawn, my heart steady and my mind focused. This was the day I had planned for months. I dressed in dark clothes that would not show stains and gathered my supplies. The fuel containers were already loaded in the van. The timer devices were tested and ready. Everything was prepared for what I believed would be my moment of glory. I drove through the empty streets as the sun began to rise. Most of the city was still sleeping, enjoying their holiday morning with family. I felt superior to them all, knowing that I was about to accomplish something they would never have the courage to attempt. In my twisted mind, I was a warrior for Allah, while they were sheep living in comfortable ignorance. As I approached the church neighborhood, I could see signs of the coming celebration. Christmas lights twinkled on houses despite the morning daylight. Some homes had nativity scenes in their front yards, which filled me with fresh anger. How dare they display these symbols of blasphemy so openly? How dare they celebrate a lie with such joy and pride? My resolve hardened even further. I parked the van 2 blocks away and walked to the church, carrying my first container of fuel. The building looked peaceful in the early morning light. Someone had decorated the entrance with garlands and a beautiful wreath. A sign announced the Christmas Day service at 9 o'clock, welcoming all visitors to join them in celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. That sign made me sick. They were inviting people to participate in their delusion. The church was older than I had initially realized, with wooden siding that would ignite easily. The windows were tall and narrow, designed more for beauty than for escape. I walked around the perimeter, confirming what I already knew about the exits. The main door in front and one side door were the only ways out. If I could block both with fire, everyone inside would be trapped. I began my work methodically, starting with the side door. I poured the diesel fuel mixture around the door frame and along the base of the wall. The smell was sharp and chemical, but I had grown used to it during my practice runs. I worked quickly but carefully, making sure to create a barrier that would ignite into an impassable wall of flames. Moving to the front entrance, I repeated the process. This door was larger and more ornate, with carved wooden panels that depicted biblical scenes. As I doused it with fuel, I felt satisfaction at the thought of those images burning. The steps leading up to the entrance were concrete, but I soaked them anyway, knowing the fuel would create a river of fire that would flow down toward the street. As I worked, I began to hear sounds from inside the building. Someone had arrived early to prepare for the service. I could hear footsteps and the soft murmur of voices. My heart rate increased, not from fear, but from excitement. Soon, those voices would become screams. Soon, those people would understand the price of their blasphemy. I returned to the van for the timer devices, setting them for 30 minutes. This would give me time to reach my predetermined escape route while ensuring that the fire would start just as the congregation was beginning to arrive. I wanted them to see the flames as they approached, to understand that their celebration had been turned into judgment. The devices were simple but effective. When activated, they would create a spark that would ignite the fuel I had spread around both exits. I placed one near each door, hiding them behind decorative shrubs where they would not be noticed by early arrivals. My hands were steady as I set the timers. I felt no nervousness, only cold determination. By now, more people were moving around inside the church. I could hear someone playing the organ, practicing Christmas hymns for the service. The music drifted through the walls, and each note increased my anger. They were preparing to worship a false god with songs of joy, while I prepared to show them the consequences of their choice. I walked back to the van, checking my watch. 25 minutes until ignition. I started the engine and began driving slowly toward my first checkpoint. According to my plan, I would make several stops to establish an alibi before the fire began. I had appointments scheduled with business associates who would remember seeing me far from the church when the attack occurred. As I drove away, I felt a sense of completion that I had never experienced before. After months of planning, I was finally taking action. After years of hatred, I was finally striking a blow for Islam. I believed that Allah was pleased with my courage and that I would be rewarded for my faithfulness to the true religion. I stopped at a coffee shop several miles from the church, ordering breakfast and making small talk with the staff. They would remember me as calm and friendly, never suspecting that I had just set in motion the destruction of a church full of innocent people. I checked my watch regularly, counting down the minutes until the timers would activate. 20 minutes. Families were probably arriving at the church now, parents carrying sleepy children still in their pajamas, grandparents moving slowly up the steps, young couples holding hands as they entered together. I tried to push these thoughts away, reminding myself that they were not innocent. They were enemies of the true faith who deserved whatever happened to them. 15 minutes. The congregation would be gathering now, filling the pews, greeting each other with Christmas wishes, preparing their hearts for worship. Children would be fidgeting with excitement. Elderly saints would be bowing their heads in prayer. And the pastor would be making final preparations for his Christmas sermon about the birth of Christ. 10 minutes. I finished my coffee and returned to the van. It was time to reach my second checkpoint. I needed to be seen at another location when the fire started, far enough away that no one could suspect my involvement. I drove carefully, obeying every traffic law, maintaining the perfect image of a man going about his normal business on Christmas morning. 5 minutes. My heart began to race with anticipation. Soon the timers would spark. Soon the fuel would ignite. Soon the church would be consumed by flames, and everyone inside would face the judgment I believed they deserved. Put yourself in that moment. Imagine the weight of such evil on your conscience, the darkness that could consume a human heart so completely that mass murder seemed not only acceptable, but righteous. I was beyond redemption, beyond hope, beyond any possibility of salvation, or so I thought. I was driving toward my second alibi location when it happened. According to my watch, the timers should have activated exactly 3 minutes ago. I was mentally calculating how long it would take for the fire to spread when suddenly the interior of my van was flooded with the most brilliant light I had ever seen. At first, I thought something had exploded. The light was so intense that I had to slam on the brakes and pull over to the side of the road. But this was not the harsh glare of an explosion or the beam of a searchlight. This light was warm and pure, unlike anything in the natural world. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling every corner of the van and penetrating straight through to my soul. Then I saw him. Jesus Christ was standing in the passenger seat of my van, but standing is not the right word. He was there, present, real, more solid and substantial than anything else I had ever seen, yet somehow existing beyond the normal laws of physics. His presence filled the small space completely, though he took up no physical room at all. I had seen countless paintings and sculptures of Jesus throughout my travels, and I had mocked them all. But this was nothing like those artistic representations. This was the actual person, the real Christ, and his appearance was both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. He looked like a Middle Eastern man, which somehow surprised me, even though I knew he should. His skin was olive-toned, his hair dark and shoulder-length, his build strong but not imposing. But his eyes contained depths that I cannot describe with human language. They were filled with a love so profound that it made me understand for the first time what love actually means. Yet they also held a sadness that broke my heart immediately. He was looking at me with complete knowledge of what I had just done, and instead of the anger and condemnation I expected, I saw grief and compassion that shattered my defenses completely. "Kuram," he said, and his voice was like nothing I had ever heard. It was gentle, but carried the authority of the one who spoke the universe into existence. It was familiar, as if he had been calling my name my entire life and I had simply been deaf to it until this moment. "Why are you persecuting me?" Those words hit me like a physical blow. I had been persecuting him. Every act of hatred toward Christians had been an attack on Jesus himself. Every moment of planning this terrorist attack had been aimed directly at the heart of God. I had thought I was serving Allah, but I had been serving Satan. I had thought I was defending truth, but I had been fighting against it. Those people you hurt, he continued, and now I could see tears in his eyes. They are my beloved children. The word beloved destroyed me. In that instant, I saw the people in the church not as enemies or blasphemers, but as precious individuals loved by their Creator. The children I had tried to burn alive were beloved by God. The elderly saints I had tried to murder were beloved by God. Every person I had targeted with my hatred was someone for whom Christ had died. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to explain my actions, but no words would come. How could I justify trying to murder God's beloved children? How could I explain away the evil that had consumed my heart? In the presence of perfect love, my hatred looked exactly like what it was, the work of Satan himself. The weight of my sin crashed down on me like a mountain. I was not just a terrorist. I was a man who had declared war on love itself. I was not just a murderer. I was someone who had tried to destroy what God treasured most. The magnitude of my evil was so overwhelming that I thought it might kill me right there in the van. I began to weep, but these were not ordinary tears. I was crying from a place so deep inside me that I did not know it existed. Every tear carried away a piece of the hatred that had defined me for so long. I was mourning not just for my victims, but for the man I had become, for the years I had wasted in darkness, for the evil I had embraced while believing it was good. I know who you are, I finally managed to whisper. You are Jesus Christ, and I have been your enemy. Yes, he said simply, but I have never been yours. Those words broke me completely. Even as I had plotted his followers' deaths, he had never stopped loving me. Even as I had cursed his name and mocked his sacrifice, he had been pursuing me with relentless grace. Even as I had become everything opposed to his character, he had been waiting for this moment when I would finally see the truth. I fell forward in my seat, my face in my hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The evil that had seemed so righteous just minutes before now appeared in all its horrific reality. I was a monster who had tried to burn alive innocent families on Christmas morning. I was a man so consumed by darkness that I had convinced myself murder was holy. Can you ever forgive me? I asked, though I knew the question was absurd. How could anyone forgive such evil? How could love extend to someone who had declared war on love itself? Karam, he said, and I felt his hand touch my shoulder. The touch was real, warm, full of more love than I had ever experienced. I already have. At that moment, I understood the gospel in a way that no amount of religious instruction could have taught me. Jesus had not died for good people who made small mistakes. He had died for people like me, people whose sins were so great that only the sacrifice of God himself could cover them. He had paid the price for my terrorism, my hatred, my attempted murder, but his forgiveness came with a terrible realization. If Jesus had forgiven me, then I had to face what I had just done. Those people in the church, they were not just statistics in my twisted jihad. They were real human beings with names and families and dreams. They were people loved by God who had just experienced unimaginable terror because of my evil. The fire, I gasped. I have to go back. I have to help them. Yes, Jesus said. Now you understand. Have you ever experienced conviction so deep it changed everything about who you are? In that van on the side of a road, I died to everything I had been and was reborn as something completely new. The hatred was gone, replaced by love. The pride was gone, replaced by humility. The evil was gone, replaced by desperate desire to serve the God I had been fighting. When I looked up again, Jesus was no longer visible, but his presence remained. I could feel his love surrounding me, strengthening me for what I had to do next. I had to return to the scene of my crime, not to admire my handiwork, but to help save the people I had tried to kill. I started the van and made a U-turn, racing back toward the church with tears still streaming down my face. Everything had changed. Jesus had changed everything. I drove back toward the church like a man possessed, but now I was possessed by love instead of hatred. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I pushed the van to its limits, weaving through traffic with a desperation I had never felt before. Every second counted. Every moment I delayed could mean another life lost because of my evil. As I turned onto the street where the church stood, I could see black smoke rising into the Christmas morning sky. The sight hit me like a physical blow. My plan had worked exactly as I had designed it. The fuel had ignited, the exits were blocked, and people were trapped inside. But now, instead of satisfaction, I felt horror beyond description. Fire trucks were already arriving, their sirens wailing as they positioned themselves around the burning building. Police cars blocked both ends of the street, and an ambulance sat ready to receive victims. I could see people running toward the church from neighboring houses, ordinary citizens risking their own safety to help however they could. I abandoned the van 3 blocks away and ran toward the scene on foot. My royal robes and expensive clothes meant nothing now. I was just a man desperate to undo the evil he had unleashed. As I got closer, I could hear the screaming from inside the building. The sound cut through my soul like a knife. These were not the screams of enemies receiving justice. These were the cries of innocent people facing death because of my twisted hatred. The front entrance was completely engulfed in flames, exactly as I had planned. The side door was equally impossible, blocked by a wall of fire that reached nearly to the roof. My plan had been thorough and effective. Too effective. The people inside had no way out except through windows that were too high and too narrow for easy escape. I saw firefighters setting up ladders, trying to reach the windows where desperate faces appeared and disappeared through the smoke. An elderly man was being helped through one window by 2 younger men, all of them coughing violently from the smoke inhalation. Children were crying for their parents, their small voices barely audible over the roar of the flames. Without thinking about my own safety or the consequences of revealing my involvement, I ran directly to the fire chief who was coordinating the rescue efforts. "The exits are blocked by accelerant," I shouted over the noise. "There are fuel patterns around both doors. You need to approach from the windows only." The fire chief looked at me with surprise. "How do you know about accelerant patterns?" he demanded. "Because I set them," I replied, the words tearing from my throat. "I did this. I started this fire, but now I need to help save them." The fire chief grabbed my arm, probably thinking I was either insane or trying to confess to a crime I had not committed. But when he looked into my eyes, he must have seen the truth there. "Are there any other exit routes?" he asked urgently. "Any way to get people out that we might not know about?" I tried to remember everything I had observed during my surveillance. "There is a small door in the basement that leads to an alley," I said. "It connects to the fellowship hall. If you can get through the smoke, some people might be able to escape that way." The fire chief immediately radioed this information to his teams. Within minutes, firefighters were breaking down the basement door I had described, creating a new escape route that I had overlooked in my planning. Thank God I had overlooked it. Thank God my evil plan had not been completely thorough. I watched as people began emerging from the basement, carried by firefighters or stumbling out on their own, a mother clutching her infant son, a grandfather supporting his teenage granddaughter, a young couple helping an elderly woman who could barely walk. Each person who escaped alive felt like a small victory against the darkness I had unleashed, but I could not just stand and watch. I needed to do something, anything, to help undo the evil I had caused. I approached one of the firefighters who was preparing to enter through a window. "Let me help," I said. "I know the building layout. I can guide you to where people might be trapped." The firefighter looked at me skeptically. "Are you trained for this? Do you have gear?" "No," I admitted. "But I am responsible for this fire. I have to try to save them." Before he could stop me, I grabbed a wet cloth from one of the rescue workers and wrapped it around my face. The firefighter tried to grab my arm, but I was already moving toward the building. I could not let protocol or safety concerns stop me from trying to rescue the people I had tried to murder. I climbed through one of the lower windows, dropping into the smoke-filled interior of the church. The heat was overwhelming, and the smoke burned my eyes and lungs immediately. But I pushed forward, crawling low to stay below the worst of the smoke, calling out for anyone who might still be trapped inside. The sanctuary was a scene from hell. Pews were overturned where people had tried to escape. Christmas decorations were melting and burning, filling the air with toxic fumes. The beautiful stained glass windows were cracking from the heat, and pieces of burning debris were falling from the ceiling. I found a family huddled in a corner, a father trying to shield his wife and 2 small children from the flames and smoke. They were trapped by a beam that had fallen, blocking their path to the windows where others were escaping. The man looked at me with desperate hope when I appeared through the smoke. "Can you help us?" he gasped. "My children, they cannot breathe." I did not hesitate. I threw my full weight against the burning beam, ignoring the pain as it seared my hands and arms. The father joined me, and together we managed to move it enough for his family to squeeze through. I helped him lift his children toward the window where firefighters were waiting to receive them. As I handed the second child to safety, the little girl looked directly into my eyes. She could not have been more than 5 years old, with dark hair and bright brown eyes that reminded me of my youngest sister. "Thank you," she whispered in a voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. That simple expression of gratitude from a child I had tried to kill broke me completely. I had planned to murder this precious little girl and her family. I had wanted to watch them burn alive. The magnitude of my evil hit me again with fresh horror. How could anyone forgive such darkness? How could God love someone who had fallen so far into Satan's deception? I continued moving through the building, helping firefighters locate and evacuate the remaining victims. With each person I helped save, I felt a small measure of redemption, though I knew nothing could fully atone for what I had attempted. I was covered in burns and smoke inhalation by the time we had evacuated everyone we could find. When I finally emerged from the building, I walked directly to the police officers who were coordinating with the fire department. "I need to confess to arson and attempted murder," I said simply. "I started this fire. I'm responsible for everything that happened here." The officers looked at me with confusion. I was clearly injured from the rescue efforts, and I had just helped save lives. Why would someone who had risked his own safety to help others confess to starting the fire? But when I began to provide details that only the arsonist could know, they realized I was telling the truth. As they placed handcuffs on my wrists, I felt a strange sense of relief. Justice was finally being served. The man who had planned mass murder on Christmas morning was being arrested. I would face the consequences of my actions as I should. I would pay the price for my evil, as was right and proper. But even as they led me to the police car, I could feel the presence of Jesus still with me. His forgiveness had not been dependent on my ability to undo my crime or save every victim. His love was not conditional on my performance in the rescue efforts. He had forgiven me completely before I had taken a single step toward redemption. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly free. Prison changed me in ways I never expected, not because of the harsh conditions or the violence that everyone warned me about, but because it was there that I truly learned what it meant to follow Jesus Christ. My father and the royal family immediately began working to have the charges dismissed or reduced, using their wealth and political connections to try to protect me from consequences. But I refused their help. I needed to face justice for what I had done. The first few weeks were the hardest. News of my arrest had spread throughout the kingdom and beyond. A Saudi prince who had confessed to terrorism and attempted mass murder was international headlines. Some praised me as a hero who had tried to strike a blow against Christianity. Others condemned me as a madman who had brought shame to the royal family. But neither group understood what had really happened in that van when Jesus appeared to me. My cellmate was a man named David who had been convicted of robbery. When he learned who I was and what I had done, I expected hatred or fear. Instead, he showed me kindness that I did not deserve. On my third night in the cell, as I lay awake tormented by nightmares of the fire and the screams, he asked me quietly if I wanted to talk. "I heard you helped rescue people from the church you burned," he said. "That does not make sense. Why would you risk your life to save people you had tried to kill?" I told him about my encounter with Jesus Christ. I described the supernatural light, the presence of God, the overwhelming love and forgiveness that had shattered my heart of stone. David listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I am a Christian," he finally said. "I have been praying for you since you arrived, not because I am a good person, but because Jesus commanded us to pray for our enemies. I never thought God would actually answer that prayer so dramatically." David became my first teacher in the Christian faith. He had smuggled a small Bible into prison, and each night he would read to me from the Gospels. The stories of Jesus healing the sick, forgiving sinners, and showing love to outcasts spoke directly to my transformed heart. I began to understand that what had happened to me in the van was not unique. Jesus had been appearing to people and changing their lives for 2,000 years. Other Christian inmates gradually began to include me in their Bible studies and prayer meetings. These men had every reason to hate me. I was a terrorist who had targeted their faith. I was a wealthy prince while they came from poverty, yet they showed me the same grace that Jesus had demonstrated in the van. They welcomed me as a brother and helped me understand what it meant to live as a follower of Christ. The most powerful lesson came from a man named Marcus who was serving time for assault. He had beaten a man nearly to death in a moment of rage, and like me, he carried the weight of having almost become a murderer. "The difference between you and me," he told me one day, "is not the size of our sins. The difference is that you got caught before anyone died, but Jesus died for both of us exactly the same." As my understanding of Christianity deepened, so did my desire to seek forgiveness from the people I had hurt. I wrote letters to every family that had been in the church that Christmas morning, not asking for their forgiveness, but simply expressing my sorrow and taking full responsibility for my actions. Some never responded. Others wrote back with anger that I completely understood and deserved. But a few, incredibly, wrote back with words of forgiveness that brought me to my knees in gratitude. The most difficult letter to write was to the little girl who had thanked me as I helped her escape through the window. I had learned that her name was Sarah and that she had spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from smoke inhalation. How do you apologize to a 5-year-old for trying to murder her? How do you explain that the man who saved her life was the same man who had tried to take it? Sarah's parents eventually came to visit me in prison. I expected them to come in anger to confront me with the trauma I had caused their daughter. Instead, they came to tell me that Sarah prayed for me every night. She had asked Jesus to help the sad man who had saved her to find peace. A child I had tried to kill was praying for my soul. The grace of it was almost more than I could bear. During my second year in prison, I was baptized by the prison chaplain in a makeshift baptistry made from a metal tub. The other Christian inmates gathered around to witness my public declaration of faith in Jesus Christ. As the chaplain lowered me into the water, I felt the last remnants of my old identity wash away. I was no longer Khurram the terrorist or Khurram the Saudi prince. I was simply Khurram, the beloved child of God. My family disowned me completely when news of my conversion reached them. My father publicly declared that I was no longer his son and that my name would be removed from all royal records. The wealth and privilege that had defined my entire life was stripped away in a single decree. Yet instead of feeling loss, I felt freedom. I was finally free from the expectations and hatred that had shaped me. I was free to become the man God had always intended me to be. The legal proceedings took 3 years. Despite my confession and the overwhelming evidence of my guilt, my case became a political issue that complicated everything. Some wanted me executed as a terrorist, others wanted me pardoned as a member of the royal family. In the end, I was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. I accepted the sentence gladly. I deserved far worse for what I had attempted. The fact that everyone I had tried to kill had survived felt like a miracle of God's protection. I had failed as a terrorist not because of poor planning, but because Jesus had intervened to limit the damage I could cause. During my remaining years in prison, I began what would become my life's work. I started writing letters to other Muslims who had been arrested for terrorism, sharing my story and the gospel message that had transformed me. Many rejected my letters as the ravings of a traitor, but some responded with questions about this Jesus who could forgive even attempted mass murder. I also began working with Christian organizations that ministered to former terrorists. My story became a testimony to the power of God's grace to transform even the hardest hearts. I spoke to conferences, wrote articles, and participated in documentaries about radicalization and redemption. When I was finally released after serving 8 years, I had nowhere to go. My family would not acknowledge my existence, and my former friends wanted nothing to do with a Christian convert. But the church I had tried to destroy welcomed me with open arms. They had been praying for me throughout my imprisonment, and they invited me to share my testimony with their congregation. Standing in the rebuilt sanctuary where I had once planned mass murder, looking into the faces of families I'd tried to kill, I experienced the full power of Christian forgiveness. They did not just tolerate my presence, they embraced me as their brother in Christ. They funded my education and supported my ministry to other former extremists. Today, I spend my life traveling the world, sharing how Jesus Christ can transform anyone, no matter how far they have fallen into darkness. I work with organizations that reach out to terrorists and their families, showing them that there is hope beyond hatred and violence. Now I ask you this question. If Jesus can forgive someone like me, what is keeping you from surrendering to him? Look into your own heart right now. What sins are you carrying that seem too great for God's grace? What darkness in your life feels beyond the reach of divine love? I am living proof that no one is beyond redemption. The man who planned to burn families alive on Christmas morning is now a minister of the gospel. The prince who served Satan now serves the King of Kings. The terrorist who spread death now spreads the message of eternal life. Jesus did not just change my circumstances, he changed my very identity. Every day is a gift to serve the one I once persecuted. My life is no longer my own. It belongs completely to the Savior who loved me even when I was his enemy. Will you let Jesus change everything in your life? Your story of God's grace matters too. Do not let shame or guilt convince you that you are beyond hope. If the love of Christ can reach a Saudi terrorist in a burning van, it can reach you wherever you are right now. The same Jesus who appeared to me is calling your name today.